So let's look at an example of how to do this IRAC stuff. In just a moment, I'll ask you to pause the video and read over this California statute and this short little fact pattern here. And then after you've read over them, resume the video. So go ahead and pause the video and read over this section here now. Okay, so we have this definition, this California statute, which is a definition of a 3-star eco car. And we know that a 3-star eco car is a car that's at least partially powered by electricity and that gets at least 30 miles per gallon. And we have maybe a client by the name of Tyler who wants to qualify for a carpool bumper sticker. But to get that bumper sticker, he has to register his vehicle as a 3-star eco car. So the question is, under these facts, whether his minivan happens to be a 3-star eco car, so he can get that carpool bumper sticker. But before we get too caught up in the possible arguments that might come up in this analysis, let's start by clarifying what our issue is. Now, our issue here is whether Tyler's vehicle satisfies the definition of a 3-star eco car. That just comes right from the prompt of the fact pattern. All right, so we might start our issue by writing something like this. Is Tyler's vehicle a 3-star eco car? Okay, so that's what we might start with. But as we discussed earlier, this kind of issue statement doesn't really give us much information about the circumstances of our question. We need to identify the relevant law and the relevant facts of our situation. Now, we know that the statute is a California statute. It's a California statute. That's what this definition is. It's a definition of a California 3-star eco car. So we're talking about California law. So let's change our issue statement to reflect that. So we can say something like this. Under California law, is Tyler's vehicle a 3-star eco car? Well, that's better. This lets the reader know we're talking specifically about California's definition of a 3-star eco car, which may be different from Florida's definition or New York's definition. But we still don't know, well, we don't know yet which facts are relevant to the question, right? For example, does it matter that his vehicle is a minivan and not, say, a sedan? Or how about the fact that his minivan is gray? Does that matter? We don't know which facts actually matter to the outcome until we do the analysis. So let's leave the facts out for now, and we'll go to the analysis, the application first. But just to remind us that we're going to have to come back with the relevant facts, let's just put this little note. Under California law, is Tyler's vehicle a 3-star eco car when certain facts are the case? Okay, so we'll just leave that blank for now, and we'll do the analysis first. But the first step when applying a rule to some facts is to actually identify each of the elements of the rule. Now, our rule here is a definition. It's a definition, the definition of a 3-star eco car. So let's parse the elements of this rule. Right? A 3-star eco car is a car, has to be a car, that is at least partially powered by electricity, and that gets at least 30 miles per gallon. So we have 3 elements here. That means to be a 3-star eco car, 3 different things must be satisfied. It has to be a car, has to be at least partially powered by electricity, and it has to get at least 30 miles per gallon. So let's list those 3 right here. Right? So our elements are, it's got to be a car, has to be at least partially powered by electricity, and it has to get at least 30 miles per gallon. All right, so these are our 3 elements. Now, if any one of these elements is not satisfied, it's not a 3-star eco car, Okay, so sometimes the elements of a rule are in the conjunctive. Sometimes the elements are in the conjunctive. That means that all of them must be satisfied. So element A, element B, and element C. Other times, the elements are in the disjunctive. Right? Only one of them must be satisfied. Element A, element B, or element C. So you need to look closely at the language of the rule to see which one of these rule structures you're dealing with. In this case, the rule is in the conjunctive, right? It says and gets at least 30 miles per gallon. So all three of these must be satisfied. It's not enough just to show one or two of them. Okay, so let's look at the arguments that might come up for each of these elements. Tyler probably will say, Tyler will likely argue, I'll use green for Tyler's arguments. Tyler will probably argue that his minivan is a car. Right? The first element is it has to be a car. A 3-star eco car is a car. So Tyler will say, hey, my minivan it's a 4-wheeled vehicle, it travels on the road. Right? Calling something a sedan or a minivan or a compact or a crossover or whatever, these are just marketing labels. They're all cars. So that's probably what Tyler's argument is going to be, because he wants to get this carpool bumper sticker. So he wants to say that his vehicle is a car. Now, on the other hand, if the DMV wants to prevent Tyler from getting this carpool bumper sticker for some reason, the DMV may say that no, only a car is a car, right? Not a truck, not an SUV, not a van. A car means car. If the California legislature intended for all vehicles to be included in this definition, right, it would have said vehicle instead of car. So this element, whether Tyler's minivan is a car, it's not so straightforward. There are arguments that can be made either way. And in our analysis, we want to include the arguments of both sides. So that way, the reader can see how this element will play out. And then, even if it's a close call, we make a prediction one way or the other. Is it more likely that a court would consider Tyler's minivan to be a car for purposes of this statute? Or is it more likely that a court would say, no, this is not a car, at least for purposes of this statute, it's not a car. All right. The next element is whether it's at least partially powered by electricity. But this element is pretty clear cut. The facts tell us that Tyler's vehicle is an electric gas hybrid minivan, and that it generates approximately 40% of its horsepower energy from stored electricity. Right? There's no straight-faced argument that the DMV could make that 40% doesn't satisfy the at least partially powered by electricity requirement. So we don't need to lay out arguments for both sides on this one. We can just predict that this element will be met. Right? So Tyler is likely just going to be able to win this argument. This one's pretty straightforward. And finally, the last element. Tyler will probably argue that his minivan does get at least 30 miles per gallon because it gets 32 miles per gallon on the highway. Right? That's what the facts tell us right here. This minivan gets 32 miles per gallon on the highway. But the DMV will probably respond to that argument by pointing out that, well, the car has to get at least 30 miles per gallon to be a 3-star eco car. The statute requires that the car gets at least 30 miles per gallon. Not that it can get at least 30 miles per gallon. And since Tyler works in the city and does most of his driving in the city, right, his actual fuel economy is probably closer to the 24 miles per gallon city fuel economy. Now again, so let's write that here. The DMV is going to point out, come on. You do most of your driving in San Francisco, in the city, and you only get 24 miles per gallon in the city. So again here, it could go either way, right? This just isn't so clear cut. Whether this element is satisfied will depend on whether you think the statute means a car must actually be getting at least 30 miles per gallon, or just that the car is capable of getting at least 30 miles per gallon. But we need to decide one way or the other, and then give our prediction on the most likely outcome. So let's say we decided that we thought a minivan did qualify as a car, right? And we think that the powered by electricity element is a straightforward yes, so this is okay. But we think that Tyler's claim that his minivan gets at least 30 miles per gallon just because it's rated for 32 miles per gallon on the highway, we think that that's too much of a stretch. And it doesn't really actually get 30 miles per gallon, considering that he does most of his driving at the 24 mile per gallon fuel economy. So in that case, we think that one of the elements, the third element, is not met. And because all three elements must be met, remember the elements are in the conjunctive, because all three elements must be satisfied to meet this definition of a 3-star Eagle car, we will conclude that no, Tyler's minivan is not a 3-star Eagle car. Right? Now let's go back to our issue to fill in the relevant facts. Right? Having done the analysis, we now know, for example, that it does not matter what color Tyler's vehicle is. Okay? The fact that his vehicle is a minivan and not a straight car, that does figure into our analysis, as do the facts that his minivan gets 40% of its horsepower energy from stored electricity, and that he does most of his driving in the city at 24 miles per gallon. All right, so let's update our issue question to include these relevant facts. So under California law, is Tyler's minivan, that's a relevant fact, right? That mattered in our analysis of the first element. So is Tyler's minivan a 3-star Eagle car when, now we can add in the other relevant facts. Okay? When it gets 40% of its power from stored electricity, but Tyler does most of his driving in the city at 24 miles per gallon. All right, so now our issue question is a little bit longer, but see how much more helpful it is to the reader. It tells the reader the circumstances of our question, the relevant law under California law, and the relevant facts. When it gets 40% of its power from stored electricity, but Tyler does most of his driving in the city at 24 miles per gallon.